what investigators found on that daycare surveillance broke nearly every parent's heart. From the flickering grayscale of hidden security cameras at Punkin Doodles Daycare in Lindale, Texas, emerged footage that would galvanize outrage and force a reckoning. The woman on screen, Catherine Elizabeth Guziejka, then 44, had been trusted with 6 toddlers, infants and 2-year-olds, yet the tape told another story. Over months, she committed more than 100 acts of abuse, each one recorded with chilling clarity. She wasn't just rough, she was deliberate, kicking children, sometimes from behind as they watched TV, yanking them awake from naps, dragging them by the arm to changing tables, standing on their hands as punishment. The first pieces of the puzzle fell into place when a fellow daycare worker sat down to review the camera system and saw something she couldn't ignore. Footage of Guziejka delivering a swift kick to the lower back of a 2-year-old boy. That co-worker alerted the child's father, who then contacted law enforcement. Investigators from the Smith County Sheriff's Office launched a methodical comb-through of hours and hours of video. What they uncovered was devastating. At least 134 separate incidents of abuse between July and October 2024, all captured in high-definition clarity. On October 30, 2024, Guziejka was arrested and charged with 6 counts of injury to a child with intent to cause bodily injury. She had worked at the daycare since September 2023 and, according to the owner, had passed all background checks. The daycare owner, Melanie Dawn Law, fired her immediately when she discovered what the cameras had caught and reported her to both CPS and local law enforcement. In September 2025, Guziejka pleaded guilty to all 6 counts. Then in November, she was sentenced to 10 years in prison, the maximum allowed under Texas law for the 3rd-degree felony charges. The judge ordered them to run concurrently, meaning she would serve them at the same time, though she also received credit for time already served. In court, her defense argued that Guziejka has a low cognitive ability, that her IQ is significantly below average, making her low functioning. Prosecutors, however, including Smith County Assistant District Attorney Richard Vance, said the sentence was appropriate, though he acknowledged parents were frustrated that the punishment could not be longer. Sheriff Larry Smith later addressed the physical harm. He said none of the children seemed to have suffered serious physical injuries, mostly minor to moderate bruising. But he emphasized that the emotional scars could run far deeper and last much longer. Each of those toddlers, all around 2 years old as reported, endured repeated unprovoked violence from someone entrusted to care for them. The footage showed Guziejka moving among them during nap times, dragging drowsy infants, changing their heads roughly and at times forcing them to face the wall during diaper changes. Now, Guziejka will spend a decade behind bars. For the families, some relief. For the community, a reckoning. But many ask, is the punishment enough? This is her story, as told through their pain, through the unblinking eye of a camera, and through the slow, steady march of justice. In the days following the sentencing, communities in Lindale and across East Texas wrestled with a mix of relief, anguish, and deep unease. Families who once dropped off their toddlers at Punkin Doodles Daycare found themselves replaying those surveillance videos in their minds, trying to rationalize how someone sworn to protect could do so much harm. Over 130 times, in fact, according to the arrest affidavit. Prosecutors in the case said that Catherine Elizabeth Guziejka's behavior was entirely intentional, kicking children from behind while they watched television, dragging drowsy toddlers by the arm from their nap mats, and even standing on their tiny hands as a form of punishment. These weren't isolated flares of impatience. Investigators cataloged at least 134 distinct incidents over the summer and early fall of 2024. Inside the courtroom, Judge Taylor Heaton imposed the harshest penalty allowed for the 3rd-degree felony counts, 10 years in prison, with all 6 of her convictions running concurrently. Even as some parents expressed gratitude that she would indeed go to prison, others echoed a bitter undercurrent of frustration that the legal maximum still felt too lenient for what their children endured. During the plea, Guziejka's attorneys emphasized her low cognitive functioning, arguing that her IQ placed her well below typical adult standards. Prosecutors didn't wholly dismiss that argument, but maintained that the video evidence, unblinking, relentless, demanded accountability. Sheriff Larry Smith spoke quietly but with conviction after the verdict. None of the children suffered severe physical injuries, he said, though many carried bruises and other signs of distress. But he also warned that the emotional toll might far outlast any visible marks, stressing that healing would be a marathon, not a sprint. The daycare's former owner, Melanie Dawn Law, told investigators she had immediately severed ties with Guziejka upon watching the footage, then alerted both Child Protective Services and law enforcement. The center changed hands soon after, a grim reminder that even institutions meant to nurture can carry scars too deep to fully erase. In the aftermath, parents spoke of sleepless nights. Some found themselves watching their children move with new vigilance. A soft whimper in sleep now carries more weight. A sudden nap-time fuss triggers old fear. Families have come together, some in quiet solidarity, others in anger, each grappling with the question, how do we trust again? And beyond Lindale, the case has sparked a broader reckoning. Advocates for child safety are calling for more rigorous background checks, more frequent review of childcare surveillance, and better mechanisms for parents and staff to raise alarms before abuse becomes a pattern. For the 6 toddlers whose care was fractured, their families, and their community, Guziejka's sentence is a milestone, but not the end. The trauma may linger long after prison walls close, and a decade, though significant, feels to some like just a beginning. In the weeks after Guziejka's sentencing, a heavy stillness settled over Lindale, as though the community were holding its breath, unsure how to exhale. Parents spoke of a quiet, grinding grief, not just for what their children endured, but for the loss of trust in a place that was supposed to feel safe. The daycare, once filled with laughter and the pattering of tiny feet, now carried a different weight. Every nap mat, every changing table, every corner of the room haunted by what happened there. Some families, with trembling voices, told local news outlets they were considering further legal action. Others leaned on grief counseling, trying to make sense of how 6 toddlers, so young, so vulnerable, could be harmed so repeatedly and for so long. The notion that the abuse went on across months raised painful doubts. Were there signs that were missed? Reports note that the offenses occurred from July to October 2024, and authorities documented at least 134 separate incidents. Child protection advocates, in response, renewed their calls for reforms. They urged stricter protocols in childcare centers, more frequent review of surveillance footage, clearer channels for staff to report misconduct, and better protections for whistleblowers. For many, the Guziejka case became more than a shocking anomaly, it was a warning. In the corridors of the local courthouse, public defenders and prosecutors quietly debated the implications of Guziejka's intellectual capacity, which her attorneys emphasized during sentencing. Her defense likened her low cognitive ability to a mitigating factor. Critics countered that the trauma of a toddler kicked over 100 times does not excuse her actions. The judge, while handing down the full 10-year term allowed by law, also acknowledged the complex emotional calculus at play. Meanwhile, mental health professionals highlighted a long road ahead for the children and their families. While Sheriff Larry Smith noted the physical injuries in most cases were minor, the emotional and psychological toll, experts said, could last for years, even decades. Parents were urged to watch for signs of trauma, regression, sleep disturbances, uncharacteristic fear or clinginess, and to seek therapy proactively. Local policymakers quietly pressed for legislative changes. Some proposed mandatory background checks not just at hiring, but periodically. Others suggested requiring licensed centers to have independent review boards or third-party monitors. The idea, to prevent any one person from wielding unchecked power over children so young and impressionable. For the 6 toddlers, daily life went on, but everything was subtly changed. The ritual of being dropped off each morning now carried distance. Nap time was no longer an innocent stretch of sleep. For some parents, every sigh or movement in the crib became a source of anxiety. Play dates, bedtime stories, even lullabies were now shadowed by a lingering question: how long before safety felt real again? And in quiet moments, when their children smiled or whispered "mama" or "dada," the families held those precious sounds a little closer, as though by cherishing them more deeply, they could begin to mend something once broken. This doesn't end with the gavel. The community's healing has only just begun. In the months that followed, the emotional aftershocks of the case rippled far beyond the walls of the courtroom. Parents who once greeted each other with casual morning smiles now exchanged quiet nods, unspoken acknowledgments of shared pain. What happened to those toddlers had woven them together in a way none of them ever wanted, yet none of them could escape. Some families described how ordinary routines had become unexpectedly heavy. A simple diaper change could trigger memories of the footage investigators reviewed. A child hesitating before lying down for a nap sent waves of fear through parents who had once seen nap time as peaceful. Even the sound of small feet tapping across the floor, once a harmless rhythm, now carried an echo of something they wished they could forget. Therapists working with the families noted how trauma in children that young often expresses itself in ways adults might mistake for ordinary behavior: sudden clinging, quiet withdrawal, bursts of unexplained tears. Parents found themselves learning the language of trauma as they tried to help their toddlers make sense of memories they couldn't put into words. One mother told local reporters that she now slept with her child's door cracked open just to hear his breathing, reassurance that he was safe and home and untouched by anything she couldn't protect him from. Meanwhile, discussions began circulating among early childhood professionals. Conferences, trainings, and private forums turned the case into a critical example of how unnoticed patterns of aggression can evolve when oversight breaks down. Educators debated how often surveillance footage should be reviewed and who should have the authority to check it. Others argued that video alone wasn't enough, that staff mentorship, unannounced supervisory walkthroughs, and better emotional behavioral screening for employees were overdue. Community leaders, pastors, and counselors organized support circles, allowing parents to speak freely without fear of judgment. In those rooms, tears flowed in ways that didn't surface in public interviews. Many shared the same fear that their child might grow up carrying something invisible from those months at the daycare, something that would resurface years later in ways none of them could predict. As winter settled over East Texas, the town slowly began to build new rhythms. A new owner took over the daycare months earlier, but some parents still drove past with a tightened jaw, unable to look directly at the playground or the entryway without imagining the terrible contrast between what should have been and what truly occurred. Yet, even in that heaviness, there were flickers of resilience. Some of the toddlers started showing signs of healing, laughing more freely, sleeping more soundly, trusting more readily. Parents clung to those moments as proof that recovery was possible, even if slow. But the emotional question lingered, a shadow stretching across every small victory. How does a community truly recover when its youngest members were the ones harmed? In Lindale, no one had the answer yet, but they were learning, piece by painful piece, that healing wasn't a moment. It was a long, winding path, walked together, guided by the hope that one day the weight of what happened might finally lift. As winter turned to spring, the flow of information around the case slowed to a near standstill. Court records had been finalized. Local outlets had shifted their focus to newer stories. Law enforcement released no further updates. And for the parents, the quiet that followed was both a relief and a reminder. There were no new developments because the chapter, at least legally, had closed. Daily life in Lindale gradually regained its rhythm, but the emotional imprint of what happened didn't disappear. Some parents described how their children, now a little older, were beginning to form memories that had nothing to do with those dark months. Memories of birthday candles, playdates, new toys, school enrollment. These newer memories became anchors, slowly pushing the old ones further away. In community spaces, the church foyer, grocery aisles, the playground, conversations shifted from fear to resilience. Parents found strength in small milestones. A toddler laughing with a new caregiver, sleeping through the night without interruption, running toward daycare drop-off instead of clinging in hesitation. Each moment felt like a stitch in a larger quilt of healing. Child advocacy groups continued their work, using the case as a teaching model for training programs statewide. But even there, the story now lived more as a reference point than a breaking headline. In Lindale, people no longer whispered the daycare's name with the same tension. It had faded into the background, replaced by new routines, new staff, and new families. And through it all, no further information emerged from Texas authorities, prosecutors, the courts, or state child care agencies. No new court filings, no appeals, no additional investigatory releases, no expanded statements from the sheriff's office. The narrative had reached its natural conclusion, the final point in the public record. For the families, healing continued, slow, imperfect, human. But the case itself, after months of scrutiny, had reached the end of its documented trail. And now, as this story closes, viewers who have stood with us through every painful detail, every emotional turn, and every moment of this journey, your support helps keep these cases seen, heard, and remembered. If you found this coverage important, informative, or moving, make sure you subscribe to Crime Scene 24/7, like the video, share it, and leave a comment. Your engagement helps shine a light on stories that deserve to be told and helps protect the most vulnerable among us.